Okay, we are going to read 1 Peter chapter 5. It's our last chapter of this book and our last 2 weeks of study for this spring. So let's see. How many verses let's see, there's 4 of you. Do you want to split it up? 5. There's 3 parts, sort of. Or it's not very long. It's just one of you just want to read it? Okay.
Want me to read it?
Okay, go ahead, Tracy.
Therefore, I exhort the elders among you as your fellow elder and witness of the sufferings of Christ, and a partaker also of the glory that is to be revealed. Shepherd the flock of God among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but voluntarily, according to the will of God, and not for sordid gain, but with eagerness, nor yet as lording it over those allotted to your charge, but proving to be examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. You younger men likewise be subject to your elders, and all of you clothe yourselves with humility toward one another, for God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Therefore, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you at the proper time, casting all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. Be of sober spirit, but be on the alert. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. But resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same experiences of suffering are being accomplished by your brethren who are in the world. After you have suffered for a little while, the God of all grace, who called you to his eternal glory in Christ, will himself perfect, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. To him be dominion forever and ever. Amen. Through Silvanus, our faithful brother, for so I regard him, I have written to you briefly, exhorting and testifying that this is the true grace of God. Stand firm in it. She who is in Babylon, chosen together with you, sends you greetings, and so does my son Mark. Greet one another with a kiss of love. Peace be to you. Peace be to you all who are in Christ.
Okay, good. Something I'm just remembering that I didn't really write down anywhere is as we talk, as you look, if you notice any of the phrases or things that start to seem like how Peter is tying this last chapter in with lots of the other things that we saw, make sure you bring those up. I think even in some of our cross references, we get to see some tie-ins. So good. So we had that therefore, and we just talked about the therefore from chapter 4. Peter was talking to us about suffering for Christ, or suffering according to the will of God, or for doing what is right as a Christian. When you suffer like that, what did he tell us? What did we learn about that kind of suffering? There she is.
Unfading crown of glory.
Okay, there's reward, there's blessing, there's a crown of glory,
right.
All these great things that throughout this chapter, Peter has talked about with us. So then he says, therefore, and he starts to talk about 3 different groups of people at the beginning here. What are the groups that he addresses specifically?
It starts with the elders.
Elders,
Okay.
yeah.
And then the younger men.
Yep.
And
I said, and then all of you.
And all of
then
you.
all of you.
Yes.
Yeah.
He says all of you, so we don't
all
have
of
to
you.
ask
Yep,
that
okay.
question
If I
about.
look at my notes, I have it there.
We don't have to ask that question about, does this relate to us, or do we need to think about it? When he says all of you, we need to think all of you. So good. So what we spent a lot of this first chunk of the homework and then was looking at first what he says about these groups, and then in a couple of the cases what the cross references say about the group. So let's just look at the text of 1 Peter. What does he say about the elders, or what do you learn about them from him?
So I think first is that they're also, that he says, a partaker also of the glory that is revealed. So, so I'm taking that the elders are going to be partakers in the glory when Christ's glory is revealed.
Okay.
And then that they are to shepherd the flock.
Yes, shepherd the flock. Good.
Exercise oversight.
Okay,
And to do it willingly and eagerly
Eagerly.
okay,
and be an example.
okay.
Is he, wait a minute, did that come from all there?
Yep, it does.
Yeah.
Yep,
Not lord over them.
okay.
Yeah. Humble, yeah.
Yeah, what else did he say in terms of back to the verse with the partaker also of the glory? So who else and what else does he talk about there? Why does
And
he,
he considers himself an elder and a witness of the suffering of Christ.
okay, good. He seems to be putting himself in that group, or not seems to be, he is. Then also it sounds like he's still talking to people that saw Jesus in person, right?
Yeah.
With
Mhm.
that. And then the partakers of the glory, again, he just related that back to First Peter chapter 4, that because that's one of the things that you get or receive for following Christ's example
Mm.
in all things, right? Good, he threw
Yeah.
all that in. Yeah, all those descriptions come from this chapter. We might have missed one or two, but I think you got most of them.
Somebody say that you were supposed to do this and not expect any gain.
There you go. There's one, no gain, right?
Yeah.
Instead of for gain, what does he say? What should it look like?
That you're a volunteer,
Okay,
With
How-
eagerness.
Willingly and eagerly.
willingly.
right? Being those examples eagerly. Good. And then there's another idea of what they'll receive for doing this. Who do they get compared to? And what will they receive? And when?
Their chief shepherd and receive the unfading crown of glory.
Okay, good. So he tells them to shepherd the flock, and then talks to them about the chief shepherd. Who is that?
Jesus.
Jesus. And if somebody was doing this homework and they weren't sure, then going into the cross references will help us to show that and to see that. Good. So that kind of lays out this first section, and we want to go a little bit deeper into those ideas. So the first way that we did that is to look at the Greek word for the word elders. What did you guys find out about that?
Presbyteros.
These are also-
Yeah, so we can see where we got the name probably of one of the denominations, right?
Mhm.
Sounds like Presbyterian comes from this word. So they
Mhm.
focused on that idea. What did you learn it means?
Original form of priest, elderly leaders.
Okay,
They were valued for wisdom, responsibility, and authority in the church or in a
Mhm.
Christian group of
Mhm.
Christians.
okay,
And they were the leaders of the early church. Those were all things I got from looking up the word.
okay, good.
Mine
Good,
said
and
a mature man having seasoned judgment or experience.
Whoa,
Okay.
that's good.
Good,
They did
Yeah.
always, and all the ones I found refer to like older, so mature, older.
Mhm.
Um,
Yep. Yeah, not just mature as in young, but still was wise, but definitely also they were talking about being older. Okay,
Yeah.
good. Anybody have anything else? I know the
I think
definitions
they
are different.
also had to be appointed.
Okay,
I think it's Paul and Barnabas would appoint.
okay, in the cross
others.
references, maybe we'll see that. I
Okay,
didn't
yeah.
see it in the definition per se, but some of the definitions are different depending on what source you use, so. Okay, so let's
I
go ahead.
did make
go
a
ahead.
note. I did
Okay,
make a note because I think I was looking in Bible Hub maybe.
okay,
And it said that there's a feminine singular of the word, but it's not mentioned at all in the Bible. And then there's a feminine plural in First Timothy, but it refers just to aged women,
Yeah.
not someone who's holding an office. So
Yeah.
it's definitely a man.
yeah, in the Bible, it is men. It is just men. Good, yeah, Bible Hub did talk about that. Okay, let's go, since we already talked about this other idea of shepherding, and very close together, we had two sets of cross references. And I think we have plenty of time tonight. So I would like to put you all in your groups, which you haven't gotten to do for a long time. And so I'm going to have group one discuss with each other the 3 cross references for elders. And then whoever ends up in group 2, go ahead and discuss the 3 cross references that you had for shepherds, okay? Because they're all kind of right there. 76 and to 78. So starting on page 76, you'll find the ones for elders. And then, so let me make 2 groups and just give you a bit of time here. We'll talk about that. Let me pause the video because we don't need to have that on while I mess around with creating these rooms. All right.
Okay,
what
you
did
want me to
learn?
read the list?
Go ahead.
Okay, so well, first off, as Titus was just a list after list, there've been a lot of stuff. So a man above reproach, husband of 1 wife, have children who believe, and I'll sum it up as who are well behaved.
Okay.
Not be self-willed, not be quick-tempered, not to be addicted to wine. So there's a lot of nots. Don't be quarrelsome or pugnacious, not fond of sordid gain. And then the positive, be hospitable. Oh, can't read my writing.
That's what is good.
Sensible, devout, self-controlled, hold fast to the word, and loving what is good.
Okay.
Fran, you want to do what we had in Timothy?
Yeah, we tried to look at, see what was different between the Titus and Timothy.
Okay,
and
great.
We found that there was an additional attribute of able to teach.
Okay.
And another one was to have a good reputation with outsiders. So
Ah,
those 2 stood out in addition to a lot of the others were all
Yeah.
very similar. So
okay, good. Yeah. So Paul wrote them both. It's interesting that he didn't vary a lot, but he added a couple. Okay. How about Acts? Acts 20.
we had really just kind of identified that they're not to shrink from sharing the word and teaching. What was the other thing?
Or for the church?
Oh, yes, more of a responsibility to oversee care for the church.
Okay.
No,
And
I have,
go ahead, Tracy.
I had a couple other things. So I made a note that to watch over themselves and the flock, which the Holy Spirit has made them overseers.
Ah,
So,
yes.
yeah.
Good.
Oh,
Yeah.
where did you
then,
get that?
That's in Acts 20.
Yep.
Yeah, okay, I see.
Yeah.
And then to be on the watch for the wolves that are among you that will distort the truth.
Okay, good. Yeah, so in a couple places, his focus is on that word, right? Besides Acts 20, you guys said it. Where's the other place where he talks about elders needing to do something with the word? I know you said it in your list, but I just want to refocus on it.
To hold firmly to the word,
Yep.
and sound
Titus.
doctrine.
Yeah, in Titus, right?
Right,
So,
yeah.
so he focuses that, and then this thing that in the end of Acts, this is very near the end in
Mhm.
Acts, and what does he want them? Why, again, what's his reasoning for wanting? Why does he use the word shepherding, do you think, in Acts, which is going to be a great lead-in to you guys talking about shepherding? What was his reason for using the phrase shepherd instead of just elders or overseers?
He doesn't want the devil to draw you away.
Okay,
So, I was, when I read that, I was sort of picturing a shepherd's hook,
yeah. Oh,
and,
good.
and the shepherd just drawing them in and keeping them close
Mhm.
and keeping in the
Protection.
word,
Mhm. And
So
specifically, we know the enemy, the devil, but who else does he talk about being that enemy? Because it's going to relate directly to the verses for the shepherd too.
The
Uh-oh.
wolves,
The
the
wolves.
wolves, so the
Who-
false
who are-
teachers.
Yeah,
false
the false
teachers.
teachers. And
Mm.
where do they come from?
Within
within.
the
From
eldership.
among you.
Right? They will rise up speaking perverse things to draw you away. Again, this is such a strong focus. I don't think that before we studied Revelation, I actually realized that these verses talk about this coming from within the church. I knew deception would come, I knew deceivers would come, but I think it didn't really hit me that, oh, that's what it says. It
Yeah.
says, watch out from among you, right? That's kind of important key. Let's see how it ties in. Anybody want to add anything else, any of you, on what you got then? What's your general takeaway then? How should we look at this role? Or Mary, what are you ready to say?
I was just good. And I also wrote down not a new convert.
Mm,
Oh,
I
yeah,
don't know where,
that's true. Why is that such an important thing that Paul put that in there?
well, they might not know yet what is truth and what isn't.
Okay, good.
Lots of things come to my mind,
Yeah,
but
Didn't
yeah.
Paul-
They might
Didn't
look
Paul
at the
have some-
position.
go ahead,
as
Tracy.
a high, they might look at it as a high position and become conceited.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
Give into pride,
Right, his
Mhm.
wording is puffed up
related
and
them-
pride. Yeah,
related them to the devil.
okay. Dee Dee, did you have something too?
Didn't he have some experience with some of his converts that were in the church and then started leading people away? In some of the other letters, doesn't he mention these people the people that had fallen away? And
Mhm.
so maybe,
think he
so
does,
not
yeah.
knowing when this is written according to others, but maybe just even based on same things that he has experienced, is that's people within the church. And
Mhm.
if we can relate to Jesus, the parable of the seeds in the shallow soil,
Oh,
that
yeah.
that spring
Yeah.
up flat fast, but
Yeah.
don't have any roots.
Hmm.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I know we all can
Sure.
think of lots of reasons why it's a protective idea not to have brand new believers, no matter how capable they seem of going right at the forefront of leadership, because the enemy is just going to find any of these ways to go after them,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and
And,
because they're
yeah.
supposed to be able to handle the word.
Yes, that's
to
another good
properly
point.
manage
Yes,
The word. And if they're
yes.
new, they're not going to know the word.
Exactly. Great point. Yes. I mean, if you think how this is like our sort of application here in the middle, when you think about this list, like I have a couple of thoughts come to mind. And in this class, we do have a pretty wide range of where people go to church. Like, do you know if your elders meet these criteria? You know, do we even know in our churches if our elders actually, because these are the biblical list, right? This is God's list. And do we
Right.
even know if they meet them? So that's just a thought. And how like, that's a pretty good list. Like how
Yeah, it was a good
it
list.
sounds pretty rare to me. Like we all should be all these things, but that's just another thing that a reminder of. One of them also, it said holy, right? Like we're all called to be holy. He is holy. But any thoughts just on what you gained then overall by this list or by looking at these again?
I think the church was so, because how it was purchased
Yes,
by
that's
the
in there.
blood of
Yep.
Jesus, that it was important
Yeah.
that there were people in charge, overseers, shepherds that were going to tend to the flock. Because he kept
Yeah.
asking, feed my sheep, tend my,
Yeah.
it was very important that, that it was purchased with Jesus's own blood. So
Mhm.
yeah, wanted taken care of.
Yeah, that's great from that passage in Acts. And one of
Yeah.
the things I don't know if we hit on is that when he's addressing Titus right at the beginning, he says to do this so that you set things in order, right? Again, this picture of knowing that God wants order in Christian relationships, whether it's work relationships, husband and wife relationships, and within the church, right? Because the church is the example. Yeah, Mary?
And it is, that word protection, that God set that out from the very beginning to
Yeah.
protect his
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
in ways that the world wouldn't understand, that's for
Yeah.
sure.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't think that we push aside. We forget so often so much of his
Mhm.
care is protection and care, and not
Mhm.
just
It's
just
not
do
rule
this,
after
right?
rule
It's
after
not
rule
rule.
for no reason.
Right.
It's
yeah.
there for a reason.
Yeah, literally those guardrails that he pictures so often
Yeah.
through scripture.
Yes.
Yeah, good. Anything else about elders before we tie it in, which they did already for us in Acts 20, and which Peter does as well? to the idea then of them being shepherds. Anything else in general here? Okay,
I
well,
like- I
go
like
ahead,
where-
Tracy.
I like where it talked about he has to be able to manage his own family,
Uh-huh.
because if he can't manage his own family, how can he take care of the church?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, again, I wonder sometimes if that, and that's so personal, that we really have to rely on the people choosing these elders to know that. And you know what, even that, I'm just thinking of, that's protective too, right? That's actually protective for that man to not get into stuff over his head or in the church while he's dealing with stuff at home, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great one
Yes.
to bring back up, Tracy.
My,
Other-
my previous church pastor was one of the reasons why I just had to walk away. He divorced his first wife, changed his religion, became a pastor with the Methodist church. He was Catholic and he turned into a Methodist.
Okay,
Then his children all were disobedient and had numerous children and got caught up with drugs and
okay,
had numerous children that they couldn't support that he ended up taking in. They turned around and rejected him and have gone off and left him and his new wife. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like disaster. And
Yeah.
how can he manage during COVID? How can
Yeah.
he manage the church and its issues with all these personal issues?
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
felt, I mean, I've got, there's grace to be had there for him, but I mean, it's like, how do you look up to him and say, this is how I would help, get some guidance from you, because he can't even control his own family.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
but
yeah. And I'm glad you brought
sad.
that up from a pastor, because when we
Yeah.
talk about elders and you think
Mhm.
about Peter and Paul both putting themselves in this category, so how does a pastor then relate to this list? If this is the list for elders, should pastors also fall into this category? Yes.
Yes.
And that's another thing we need to know too. Are our pastors, like, let's go just to the word, are they handling the word accurately, right?
That was the other issue.
It's hugely important. It's not just something that we can bypass for lots of reasons, but also because if you're going to hold your elders to that standard, your pastors better be doing that as well. So we needed to bring that out. So I'm glad, because pastors would fall into this, especially once we get to the word shepherding, right? We would all think of our pastors in this word, biblically at least. I know giftings are a bit different, and some pastors are more like shepherds, some are more like teachers, but the word does call them, I think, as we look at it, to shepherd the flock, right? So there is some shepherding to be done. So speaking of that, Mary and Tracy will start us off on what we found from the cross references in about shepherding, and then we'll all jump in on that.
Okay, in Matthew 9, we looked at what it said about Jesus. Jesus was teaching in the synagogues, and as the shepherd, the main shepherd, he was proclaiming the gospel, healing every disease and affliction. He had compassion, and that those are all actions that a shepherd would have if they were a shepherd of Jesus's, not Jesus's flock, but whatever, the church.
Okay.
Anyway, and
Yeah.
the other thing, when it said there were few workers for a plentiful harvest, I wrote that down, and then I thought, why did I write that down? And the picture that came to me was that the shepherd, there's one shepherd, for a whole flock.
Mhm.
And
Mm.
I don't know whether Jesus was thinking that, or Peter was thinking that when he wrote that right there, but in order to have a plentiful harvest, we got to have a good shepherd.
Yeah.
And an active one.
Good.
Okay, Tracy.
Yeah, well, and then he also
Mhm.
kind of talked about the sheep that were without a shepherd that were
Yeah.
harassed and helpless.
Yeah.
So
Oh, yes.
the shepherd is needed so that they're not harassed and helpless.
Yeah.
Good. And that
And
was
then-
where, when he looked at the people and he had compassion, because that's how they looked to him, right? There again, another idea we should think of in our minds when we look at how he's looking at his people and the people who
Yeah.
don't know him yet, like sheep without a shepherd. And to
Mhm.
lots of people, this probably doesn't make that big of a difference. So, but for those of you, if you're watching, if you've never read the book, a tiny little book, A Shepherd Looks at the 23rd Psalm, read that book. It is beautiful, and you will have
So
such a
beautiful.
clear understanding of what Jesus does for us. You
Mhm.
just don't know if you don't know what shepherds do. And most of us don't actually know what shepherds do. So a real life shepherd gives his input on the 23rd Psalm about shepherding. So anyway, that's a little commercial. I have no sponsorship from the book. It's just amazing. And a lot of us read it when we studied John. So great. He sees them in that light of needing somebody to take care of them, basically, right? Okay, back to you
Right.
guys. Sorry.
Yep. And then in John 10, I wrote that the shepherd is the one who enters by the gate.
Mm.
So anybody who goes over the wall is not the shepherd.
Mhm.
The gatekeeper opens the gate to the shepherd. The sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. And he goes out ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. And the good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep and knows his sheep, and they know him. And then I wrote one flock, one shepherd, and that was where he was talking about the sheep that are not of his. So he was talking about the Jews and the Gentiles together.
Okay, good. Yeah. Anything else from that one? In a way here, he contrasts being a good shepherd with being a bad shepherd, but he refers it to the hireling, the person who's just hired to kind of temporarily watch other people's sheep. Anybody know like what the big difference is there, or why that's a big deal?
Where he talks about the good shepherd lays down his life, he kind of talks about if a lion comes, the hireling's going to run away and leave the sheep abandoned to the wolf or the lion. But the good shepherd would fight for them and
Okay,
lay down his
good.
life for them.
Good. That idea that there's a
Mm.
difference, right, between somebody who's just doing it as a, okay, yeah, I can do that as a job, versus the person who does it for a calling and does it like Jesus would do it sacrificially, right? Good. Yeah. Again,
Watch
and
my
this-
sheep while I go on vacation, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And the news is that Jesus never goes on vacation, so we always have him, right? We can always rely
Right.
on him when our earthly shepherds are not maybe doing what they could. But this is just another place where you'll get great insight into this idea of him going before us. That's huge in the real shepherding community. And also them knowing his voice, and he knows
Yeah.
them, and beautiful picture here.
Mhm.
Okay, good. And you guys had John 21 also, which is interesting to get this in here, but I'll be interested to see what you thought about it being thrown in with these passages.
I'll say one thing, and then Tracy, you come in with your good list there. I noticed that it was a call to action. It isn't just words. He isn't just saying, sit there and look at them. Be sure, count them once in a
Yeah.
while.
Yes.
You're feeding my sheep. I mean, feeding my lambs, tending my sheep, feeding my sheep. And then there were some other things that we talked about, but Tracy, you had such a good list there.
Oh, I didn't have a list on this one. This is just so for people who are listening, I guess. This is where Jesus, after he's resurrected, he meets with the three disciples or the disciples, and he asks Peter, "Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me?"
Mhm.
And each time Peter responds, "Yes, I do." Then he tells them, "Feed my lambs, take care of my sheep, feed my sheep." And so Mary had some good insight about it being a call to action, and like the lambs are the new members, the sheep are the active or mature members. And then, taking care of my sheep, or she was saying was tending, which I looked at as nurturing or caring for.
Mhm.
And then Mary made the comment that the shepherd is always on duty.
Yes,
I like that.
good. What do you think of the
Oh.
connection of he asked him, do you love me? And then do this. What does that tell you about the role of a shepherd in our circumstances, whether they're our pastors or our elders?
They need to love God, love Jesus, and
Love
love
God
their
and love
people.
his people.
Yes, right? That if
Love
you're
people.
not doing this for love of Jesus, again, you're more like that hireling and you're not really the person who's
Mm.
going to love them. We're not all super lovable all the time. So
Mm.
it's a bit of a challenge
We're not.
to lead a bunch of people that may or not always be lovable. Good. Other thoughts from anybody on shepherding and the call to do that for elders and pastors?
It just, I don't know if you have heard this before, but do you love me? Jesus is asking him, the agape,
They got me.
do you love me? And
Yeah.
twice he asks him, do you love me? And Peter goes, yes, I love you, in the
Phileo.
phileo.
Mm.
And then finally, he says, the third time Jesus uses the phileo, and just said, like, do you even love me as your brother? And
Mhm.
so I think that's interesting how he
Mhm.
either I'm not sure the context is exactly whether it was like, do you even love me, or do I need to come to a more connection with you at your level? I don't know
Mhm.
what he meant by that, but he's trying to get to the heart of it.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so are you even my friend?
Mhm.
So
Yeah, we talked about it when we studied John, but we did also talk about it in our introductory a little bit to First Peter, because this was part of Peter's progression of growth. That before, bold Peter, before Jesus died, would have said, of course, I love you. I agape you. Of course I do. Of course I do. But he knew he couldn't. This is just kind of my take on it and how we kind of just did it. But he couldn't. He knew at this point he couldn't answer it that way. So he answered with the only answer he knew he could say for sure, because the agape love is the self-sacrifice love, and he knew he blew that, right? He knew he didn't do that.
Right.
So he says, I know for sure I can do this. And I think you're right. The third time Jesus says, okay, I'll ask you it the way you say you do it. I think that's what he wanted to hear him say. Like, Peter, you need to recognize that that's where you are. But then did Jesus still use him? That's the beauty of the
Yes.
final time, right? Is he didn't say, okay, well, if that's all you can love me, then you can't do this. He said, no, that's what you can do. And Peter had learned the lesson, I think, of, I know that I didn't. I know that I can't say that for sure. Would I die for you? I don't know if I would die for you, but I can take care of, I do love you. I love you. It's just beautiful. It's
is.
just absolutely. But again, of course, in English, we miss it unless you're doing a study like this, or you just know to look up words, because then otherwise you're like, why does he ask him 3 times? There's a huge reason why he asked him 3 times. He denied him 3 times.
Yeah.
He asks him 3 times and gives him the chance to show that he's still going to use him. It's just gorgeous. It's just beautiful, right? So anybody, other thoughts? I know most of you, yeah, we've discussed it twice probably. So yeah.
Well,
I just love the first of it when he said he's the door of the sheep.
Oh, yes.
And anyone, if anyone, that's whomsoever enters through me, he will be saved. He said, I am the good shepherd, and the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep.
Perfect. Again, the word is
That's
perfect,
God,
right?
that's Easter story. Oh,
Yeah. Yes. Yes. That's another great, yeah, we could just, the John passages on shepherding and sheep are just so amazing. Yeah. And that good contrast to that John 10 as well. We get going back to the Acts 20 about the wolves and the people that come from within, right? There's a picture here in John 10 of that person that tries to come in and take care of the sheep or steal them the back way, the false way, the cheating way by coming in over, right? So somebody who knows these are the sheep but it's going to be the false teachers and the false carers and don't really do what they're supposed to. So the contrast makes another great teaching there on watching out for the false ones as well. But we're supposed to know, right? They know his voice. Yeah. Tracy? Did
I
you
was
wanna say
just
something?
thinking as you were talking about that, so the hireling, he's still kind of shepherding the flock. And so they would still know his voice and they would follow him, and he might know them by name,
Yes.
but at the first sign of trouble, he's going to leave them alone and run
Yeah.
away.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Or in some way, maybe he won't even leave, right? And that's kind of the scarier part. Instead of leaving, he'll abandon the hard teaching, right? The hard thing, and just try to take the easy way while the sheep are still there following him because some of them don't know better yet. It's all just really scary. Scripturally, I should have gotten the passages. I didn't think and go look, but in the Old Testament, there's some great lists on what it looks like to be a bad shepherd. So if you want to find those, I'm sure you can probably find them maybe in some of the other cross references, or if you do a search on it. But the Old Testament has some pretty harsh words for the contrasting not good shepherd. So that's an interesting preface to Jesus coming on as the good shepherd as well. In fact, we would have had time probably to talk about him. I should have brought him. But anyway, I did. Some of them come if you go to Hosea. I studied Hosea a couple summers ago on my own, and I know that I had some cross references from the book of Hosea into the bad shepherd. I think one of them's in Psalms, actually. There's a thing on a bad shepherd, but anyway, we're a bit off topic a little bit. Okay, so yeah, Tracy.
So in Acts, when it talks about watching out for the wolves who distort the truth, it says to draw them away to follow them. So they do still want the sheep to follow them, even though they're not speaking the truth.
Yeah, to just draw them away after themselves. Yeah, to follow other teaching. Yeah, great point.
Mhm.
You know, and they stopped us at verse 30, but I put down verse 31 back to that Acts 20 passage because he says, therefore watch, right?
Oh, yeah, I do too. Be on your guard.
Yeah, be on your
Watch.
guard.
And remember that for 3 years,
Mhm.
I did not cease to warn everyone night and day with tears. Like that's how seriously concerned he is about the false teacher, the wolves. So yeah, which is going to tie in great with 2 Peter when we get there. So we'll probably see this passage again. I wouldn't be surprised. Good. Again, so other thoughts on
Ezekiel 34 is a full,
okay.
The whole Ezekiel 34 is all on bad shepherds and the contrast. So if you want to read that.
Yeah, well, how long is it?
It would take
You want to read it to us?
Well, the word of the Lord came to me, immortal.
Here, just a second. We'll let everybody grab it too. Ezekiel 34, if you guys want to look.
Ezekiel 34?
Yes.
Okay.
Prophecy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophecy.
That's right. Yes.
Shepherds. Thus says the Lord God, all you shepherds of Israel who have been feeding yourselves, should not shepherds feed the sheep? You eat the fat, you clothe yourselves with the wool, you slaughter the fatlings, you do not feed the sheep, you have not strengthened the weak, you have not healed the sick, you've not bound up the injured, you have not brought back the strayed, you have not sought the lost, but with force and harshness you have ruled them. So they were scattered because there was no shepherd, and scattered they became food for the wild animals. My sheep were scattered, they wandered over all the mountains and on every high hill. My sheep were scattered all over the face of the earth, with no one to search or seek them. Therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. And it goes on. And it's talking about just, he's going to sit down in 23. I will set up over them one shepherd, my servant David, and he shall feed them. So it goes.
There you go. That's why the good shepherd came, right? My servant David in the line of David. Yeah, there's a lot of repetition there, but that's a pretty good, we could stop and discuss just what Fran read out loud. Look at all the lack of care there is that's what he's talking about, that nurturing and the tending that he asked Peter to do is what's not being portrayed by the shepherds that he was talking to. So yeah, and that's why it's in the Old Testament, because there were lots of times the priests and the leaders of Israel got called out for not taking care of the sheep, but only themselves. Just like Peter said, not for sordid gain, right? But voluntarily and out of eagerness and out of love for the Father, you're going to do these things. So because we spent so much time on this, you probably would imagine that the homework and what we would see, there's a lot of verses on it, that it's important. Why is it so important that they set this up this way, that elders and leaders in the church and the pastors are supposed to kind of meet this list?
So that they'll be able to lead and be an example to their followers, to
Mhm,
build up the body.
mhm. Yeah.
I was going to say that the simple answer, because that's what Jesus did.
Mm.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
Good.
Yeah,
I would,
Sunday
I would-
school answer.
that's a
Yeah.
good answer.
is
Well,
it representative? So we have, Christ to the church. And so then that's a little more, something we can more get our head around is the
Mhm,
is the
mhm.
pastor to the church, the
Mhm,
shepherd to the church. Like they're supposed to be doing what Jesus does. He's an earthly representation
Mhm,
of Jesus. He's the head of the individual church, whereas Jesus is the head of the whole body. Just
mhm.
like the
Good.
marriage is supposed to be the church relationship also. So there's just
Mhm.
another thing to help, because we need so much. I mean,
Mhm.
we are sheep. We just scatter so easy. We just
Yes.
wander off. And so we need all those examples to keep reminding us of how we're supposed to be.
Yeah,
Well, and,
yeah.
and because
Good.
we just got through talking about submitting to authority. So
Mhm.
the elders
Good.
and the pastors submit to God
Good, yeah.
by following
Yeah.
and shepherding his flock.
Yeah. Yeah,
Is it
Mary?
also to grow the church? I was thinking of, a flock doesn't stay static. I
Mhm.
mean, there's males and females, and so they produce
Yeah.
baby lambs and baby sheeps. So I was
Yes.
thinking, that's one of our calls too, to seek the
Mhm.
lost and bring them to the fold
Mhm.
or
Well,
to the
Yeah.
flock.
one of them is to have a good reputation outside the church. So that would
Yeah.
go towards helping grow the church. No one's going to
Mhm.
go follow somebody that doesn't have a good reputation.
Mhm.
True.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And there goes that thing about, the claim against Christians for hypocrisy stems from some of those times, right? Where people outside know the people in their outside life, and then know what they're proclaiming to believe and profess inside the church. And they see that sometimes, right? Which is why we have this calling to be separate. That's that word for holy, right? To look different so that you can have that beyond reproach, so that you get to go back to what Peter says is, if they malign you and you're not really doing anything wrong, that's not on you. That there's going to be some judgment for that. But if they malign you, or if they tell the truth about what you're doing, which is bad, and it's the truth, then that's going to be judgment on you and on the church. And it never goes well, right? Unfortunately, we see this publicly every now and then, right? And what happens every time a famous public pastor or leader of some church gets called out publicly? What do you think that does for the church?
Not good.
They never hear about the zillions of pastors of tiny little churches who are doing it beautifully, or even of bigger churches that are doing it beautifully. They're not going to make it on the news, right? They're not.
Yeah. No.
No.
You get that whole, see, there you are. They're all a bunch of
There you are.
hypocrites.
They're all a bunch of
You know,
Yeah.
they get
My
that
son-in-law.
stereotype. Yep.
Yeah.
Bunch of
Yeah.
hypocrites.
Yeah. So we need to be careful who we have as leaders, right?
Yeah.
Because again, we all need people to follow as well. They are examples to the newer people that come in, and they're supposed to be shepherds, which is, I think, maybe the element that maybe gets forgotten in that list. You might have some good leaders, but are they all shepherds? Do they all need to be shepherds? according to scripture, what would you say?
Hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Sounds like yes. It sounds like they should all be able to shepherd the flock, to care for them at least, right? To nurture, to care, to tend, to want to do that and not think of it as not lord it over them, right? Not do it for
Right.
pride, not do it for all those other reasons that they could be doing it. Yeah. What about in the context and the times that Peter was talking about, and then how does that relate to us? Is there any significant importance to the people he was talking to, and also for us? Any thoughts on that, or the times, for instance, that he was talking about in chapter 4, the time coming?
Time for judgment.
Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking about accountability, and it really didn't discuss how, that it says, you have so many things that you're not supposed to do, and you have to be with, have humility and be humble and all, but who holds them accountable? If we're to, to be the sheep, then, somehow we have to be empowered sheep.
Yes.
They go bad, bad.
That was a really good sheep, Fran. I cannot
It
beat
really
sheep at
was.
all. That was really good. You
Well,
probably
then-
have sheep. Do you have sheep, Fran?
No, I don't.
You have chickens? You have
I have
chickens, right?
chickens and ducks
Yeah.
and
Anyway, it
horse,
was very good. I think
dog.
that's a great point, because this instruction is here to make that order in the church. But
Mhm.
again, if it's also there for all of us to read, whose responsibility is it to make sure that our church would stand up to outsiders looking, or Jesus looking, right? Because remember, what did Peter say is going to come for these elders who do this well? Who's watching them? They're really
How it
under
is.
shepherds, right? Yeah, the chief shepherd is coming someday with
Yeah.
reward or not, right? And in chapter 4, Peter reminded us that where does judgment start?
In the church.
In the church, with the house of God. He's always looking, right? He's looking because we're supposed to look like Jesus. We're supposed to have that example. Good discussion. Anything else on the importance of this word about elders?
I also just looked at this as I looked at my children, and I thought about daycares and how I would search out the right daycare for my
Mhm.
children.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I wanted one where I could see what was going on at any
Mhm.
time during the day, because these are my babies and I love them, and I want them to be treated right,
Mhm.
so yeah, that's how I kind of looked at this and compared that to,
That's a great picture. That's a great example that moms at least can relate to, right? Of knowing
Yeah.
what you would want for that kind of care. Great relation there, Kat. Yeah. Okay. So the only thing we have really to discuss for the end of this first half of our homework was that he talked very briefly, compared to how we looked at elders. Peter also mentioned these other two groups. We already mentioned that they were the younger men and then all of you. So what does he say in his text about the younger men? What are they to do or be like?
Likewise,
Likewise.
so I would think that means all the same as elders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The same, and then this other call that he spent a couple chapters on earlier.
So yeah, being subject to the elders.
Yeah. And why is that? Again, that can just sound like, oh, here he goes again, talking about submission. But why do younger men in the church need to be submissive to these elders?
Well,
So they
like I
can
said,
learn.
yep,
Yeah.
as a sign of order. As a
Order.
because of order, and then because so they can learn, because the elders are supposed to be more mature and experienced. So
Mhm.
Yes, again, so when we look at these things from the positive viewpoint, if we always start with that God's looking out for his church, then yes, we're going to look for positive. Be submissive, younger men, so that you can learn to do the likewise, right? You're only going to learn to be like them if you submit and follow them. If you're rebellious and say, oh, I don't have to be like that, then you're not ever going to be like that then. And that's what you're supposed to aspire to, right? There's a picture of this order we're supposed to all get to. Good. What about the all of you? Because it always comes
Likewise
back to this.
also.
Yes,
Likewise.
likewise, all of you. And
Therefore,
then, yes,
Yeah.
therefore what?
we all need to follow. We all need to
And,
be
and then
humble. and
be humble, right?
Yeah.
This is all going to come down to back just what he said before in the other submission chapters. If you all submit one to another, which looks like the word he uses here, right? Which is
Yeah.
humble. Be subject, and then all of you clothe yourselves with humility. There's a couple of really good whys we want to do this. Why do we want to be humble according to Peter?
So that we can be with Jesus.
That is a great Sunday school answer.
I know, I was thinking that as I was,
Exalt you in the proper
as I
time.
was saying that. but- Oh
That would
dear.
be true. I can't say that's not
Yeah.
true.
Well,
That's what all my
because he's,
kids would do. That was their answers, yeah.
yeah, well, but it says that,
Yeah.
I can't find it right now, but
That he
It's
may
in-
exalt you at the proper time.
oh,
Okay.
there you go.
So if we don't exalt ourselves, he will. There's
Yes.
another really good why. It's the first one he gives. He's quoting somewhere.
Oh,
Because God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace
Yes.
to the humble.
I
Gives
wrote it
grace,
down
right?
even.
He's opposed to the proud and gives grace to the humble. So which category do you want to be in? There's
Grace
just two
category.
as usual,
Humble.
right?
Yeah, you wouldn't get grace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you don't want God opposing you, right? We don't want God
No.
opposing us. And then he will exalt us when we humble ourselves.
Yes.
Interestingly enough, in the next 4 verses, in fact, in that same sentence, he says, humble yourselves, God will exalt you. And then what does he tie that to in the end of that same verse? So we know they must be related. What does he relate to humbling yourself?
Casting all your anxiety on him.
Yeah, what do you make of that? Like, what does that mean? Why are those together?
I think that because when you give your anxiety to Jesus, to God, it's saying, I can't handle this. I trust God to handle it. So you are humbling yourself and admitting you can't do it on your own.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. It's a sign of humbling yourself. Good. That's a
I
good
was-
answer.
I was thinking of like the whole suffering thing that, sometimes our human side is to fight back.
Okay.
And so if we humble ourselves, then we can cast that anxiety of wanting to fight back onto Jesus.
Okay. Good. Good. Any other thoughts?
Well, I just the old let go and let God, sometimes when we're afraid of things, we grab a hold and want to take control of it ourselves. And he's saying, let go and let me take care of those things, and, rely on God working through these issues instead of trying to take it on yourself.
Well,
Good.
yeah, and then the devil's prowling around waiting, and if he sees us trying to do it in our own power, that's not how we're supposed to be doing things. So,
Yeah, great. Because then that's what we're doing. We're going to go, if you go on here, there's a group of things connected here in verses 6 through 10. And that's one of them too, right? Is that enemy is waiting. He's waiting for you. And so apparently pride and anxiety must lend you to the position of the devil watching for those things, right? Good. In
Yeah.
fact, we have that phrase, the beginning of 8, how do we watch out for, what's the phrase that Peter uses, reminding us to watch for the enemy to do this?
Sober spirit, be on the alert.
Be of sober spirit, be on the alert. And this is where I said this one phrase in your purpose, or in your preparation, was there 3 times, and this is the third one. Be of sober spirit. And now he ties it in to watching your adversary. And the second half of the homework goes into that in detail. But just to get us our overview, so the next connection is just so huge, and I think we can forget about this too. What are we supposed to do? We watch for him, we watch for the adversary, and then what do we do?
Resist him firm in our faith.
Yeah, again, it sounds obvious, but how are those 2 things tied together? What's the importance there in resisting the enemy?
Other people are going through this similar things.
Okay,
And-
yeah, that part, but even just what we just said, I know
Oh,
we said it
just
out
what we
loud,
just said,
but
sorry.
just to say it,
Oh,
what's the connection there? What do we have to know in order to stand, to resist the devil?
You have to know the word of God.
Okay, the word
Oh.
indeed is that,
yeah.
That God is, we're trusting God to take care of us, that we don't have to worry about it. God will fight for us.
okay, yeah, firm in your faith is you're gonna get that through this humility and submission and casting your anxiety on him. And then also where Mary started to take us, then you can see this relationship. He's taking us back to the idea of suffering, right? So he's tying this right into suffering, remembering what about suffering?
Can only be a little while, and there are others that are suffering too. And again, it's just assurance,
Mhm.
that suffering isn't unusual.
Mhm.
We should expect it, and yeah,
Yeah.
and just know that that doesn't mean that everything is going bad.
Yes, in fact, sometimes if you're suffering in the way Peter's talking about for the
Right.
cause of Christ, it can be, it might mean everything, you're doing everything right, right?
Instead of everything
It's-
bad.
Sometimes it's that exact thing, and that reminder that you're not alone, right? You're not alone, because brethren everywhere are suffering. Is that still true today?
Mm,
Are Christians in other places suffering? Yeah,
Wish it weren't.
yeah, I wish it weren't, but it is.
Well,
Yeah,
so that's
and
when,
Go ahead.
when you're resisting the devil. So that goes along that doing what is right. So you're standing
Mhm.
firm in your faith,
Yeah,
then that suffering. And so then you're reminded, it's kind of like a circular thing. You're reminded to continue to stand firm, even
yes,
though you're suffering, because the suffering is going to bring about the grace of God.
yes. And then he's gonna
Good.
get there at that end, which was our whole, we know was his theme. He names it here in the end book, right? He names what we're standing in, and then we go back and we look and we find, because here he doesn't say it. He says, this is the true grace of God, but we've brought it up a few times about what he's talking about when you go back to the beginning of First Peter and you look at where he's talking about grace. And Tracy was bringing that in. Well, let's end though with this this great verse in 10 that Mary started to talk about, right? This is a verse that just became, again, when I saw it this time. In fact, I don't remember if I talked about it in this class, but several weeks ago now, I saw this verse without it being named in a devotional I was reading, right? In the devotional, they use one verse up at the top as their key, but then this writer just writes scripture, right? It just comes out of him. And so I was reading it and I went, well, that sounds a lot like First Peter 1, but it isn't exact. So I thought, well, maybe, maybe he just kind of changed some things. But then I went ahead and I looked and I went, oh, it's because it does sound like First Peter 1, but it's actually First Peter 5. And I just thought, this is just, a great picture. And we'll talk about these words in detail next week. I don't think your homework has you talk about them in detail but we'll talk about them. So after you've suffered, what are the great things that you see here? What are the promises in verse 10?
Only for a little while.
Right, after you've suffered a little while. And again, sometimes like Abraham and other people, Elizabeth, it's like time might seem long to us, but at least to God, it's always just a little while. And sometimes that can be a comfort. What's the promise then? After a little while, what's going to happen?
He himself, God will perfect, confirm, strengthen, and
Strengthen and
establish you.
establish.
Yeah, so just sort of a hint there. If you didn't look these up and if you have time, you might want to look them all up in the Greek, because we have a tendency to kind of mush them into one thought, but I have a feeling that, well, I have looked them up before. I don't remember each specific one, but I know what one of them means for sure. And so you might want to look them up and see what are the little differences between those words in the Greek compared to what we get when we read the English. Because I bet that's an interesting verse in the parallel versions, because they probably use them all kind of different, interchangeably in different versions. You'd see them saying those things. Great discussion. We're on time. Any other final thoughts on where your mind is with this so far, this chapter?
I
They even
think it
gave you.
just led me to know that there's a big responsibility to leaders in the church, especially to newcomers that are coming in, like the baby lambs.
Mhm,
They need to be taught,
mhm,
because they're the ones that can be led astray because
Mhm.
they don't know. So they really do need a good shepherd that would care about them and bring them close to him and make sure that they're taught, from the word,
mhm.
and he watches over them to keep them safe,
Good. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even
Great.
Sunday
Pat.
school teachers, everybody. I mean,
Everybody. Yeah.
yes, all.
Yeah. Oh. Any other thoughts?
Well, I'm having this issue with suffering, the word suffering. So I go, there's got to be another word. So I looked up the Greek. And I don't know, did we do this? Because I just looked it up and I go, okay, I can live with this. Okay, so Strong's Greek is pathema, and it means strong feeling. It does include affliction, suffering, which should always ideally result in knowing God's glory.
Yeah.
Like, so you're going through something to get to glory.
Yeah.
Now, I can live with that.
Yeah.
That now I just want to use the Greek word version of them.
But isn't that what Peter's been telling us through the whole book, right? So he knows, he knows the Greek, and that's why he keeps talking to us about suffering and glory. Yeah. Perfect though. Perfect. I would encourage you, which verse did you use to find that definition?
Oh, okay.
Because there might be more. There might be different ones.
All right, I'll keep digging.
So yeah, so you could, it would be interesting to go back through all the words every time Peter used the word suffering or trials, because if they wrote trials in some places, I know sometimes trials is translated differently than that, but I don't know here for sure. But yeah, that's good though, that it's built right in. That idea of it leading, they're there to lead you to God's glory, right? We can all live with that, right? If we think about it, which I think is what Peter's telling us. So good summary. We don't even need next week's class. We could just end right there.
Good job, Fran.
Thanks, you just summed that all up. Okay, so speaking of next week, I am going to end this video and just one more time in 1 Peter.